Hello traders. In this video, I will be reviewing a subject that is crucial to know if you want to become a successful prop firm trader. It's the dreaded T word. You guessed it, the trailing threshold. I get it. The trailing threshold may not be a fan favorite. However, once you have a complete understanding of it, the likelihood of blowing an account should significantly decrease, which means you're saving time, as you don't need to restart evaluations frequently, and you'll be saving money. Let's face it, who wouldn't value having more time and money? So let's start from the top. I'm currently on the Apex Trader Funding website. As you can see, they recently updated their website design and logo. So here are the account options. The trailing threshold, or drawdown, varies based on the trading account size. The larger the account size, the greater the drawdown. For today's example, I'll use the 300K account size with the 7,500 trailing threshold, as I personally prefer a higher drawdown limit. Before diving in, let's go over the key columns needed to monitor our trailing threshold. First up is the account balance, which is $300,000 and represents the live account balance. Next up is the trailing threshold, known as the auto liquidate threshold value in Rhythmic and drawdown auto liquidation level in TraderVate. If your account balance touches this threshold, your account automatically fails, so it's crucial to keep your account balance a comfortable distance from it. Please note, the trailing threshold can only increase in price. Then comes the drawdown, often used interchangeably with the trailing threshold, but not quite the same. It's the gap between your account balance and the trailing threshold. Your account starts with a full $7,500 drawdown. TraderVate labels it as distance to liquidation only, while Rhythmic doesn't have a specific column for the drawdown. Lastly, there's the highest open peak account balance. In Rhythmic, it's called auto liquidate peak balance, and in TraderVate, it's called max net liquidation. This is the highest value your account has reached. The trailing threshold follows the open peak balance, trailing it by the max drawdown for the account size, $7,500 for a 300K account. Considering this is a fresh 300K account, the highest open peak account balance and the account balance are currently both at the initial $300,000, setting the trailing threshold at $292,500. To maintain the $7,500 trailing distance from the peak account balance, the trailing threshold mirrors the movements of the highest open peak balance. If the peak balance rises by $1,000, the trailing threshold follows suit, moving up by $1,000 as well. So now that we have all the necessary columns, let's get started. Although I'll be using a 300K account for this trailing threshold example, this concept can be applied with any of the other account sizes. Just the dollar amounts would vary accordingly. Now, let's see how this all works when we run through a few trading examples. Suppose our first trade reaches a peak balance of $302,500, but we close the trade out at $301,000. The trailing threshold, which again mirrors the movement of the open peak balance, will follow the same dollar increase as the open peak balance, which was $2,500. Consequently, it will ascend from $292,500 to $295,000. On the other hand, this situation isn't favorable for our drawdown. Even though we secured a $1,000 profit by closing the trade out at $301,000, we suffered a $1,500 loss in drawdown because we didn't exit the trade at the peak account balance of $302,500. With the trailing threshold increasing by $2,500 to $295,000, and our account balance rising only by $1,000 to $301,000, there's a $1,500 difference. This difference decreases our drawdown from $7,500 to $6,000. Remember, we want to keep our account balance as far away from the trailing threshold as possible. The best way to achieve this is by aiming to take profits as close to the highest point of our position as possible, preventing excessive drawdown. In order to get our drawdown back to $7,500, we would need to raise our account balance up to the same dollar amount as the peak balance, which is currently at $302,500. The trailing threshold will remain at $295,000 until the account balance makes a new high. Let's say we take a second trade and close it at $299,000, resulting in a $2,000 loss. Since the peak account balance didn't increase, the trailing drawdown will remain at $295,000. However, that $2,000 loss further decreases our drawdown from $6,000 to $4,000. Now let's say our third trade closes at $302,000. That's a $3,000 profit that increases our drawdown from $4,000 to $7,000. We didn't make a new high on this trade, so the peak balance and the trailing threshold both remain the same. Now in the fourth trade example, the peak balance hits a new high at $303,000, and we close the trade out at the same dollar amount. So with a $500 rise from the previous peak balance, the threshold increases to $295,500. Since the trade was closed out at the peak account balance, our drawdown also rises by $500, going from $7,000 back to $7,500. I'm going to share another common scenario that I experienced early in my prop firm trading career where not fully understanding the trailing threshold led to unnecessary failures in my evaluation accounts. My hope is this example will help you avoid similar pitfalls. I'll use a 50K account for this example. In my initial trade with my brand new evaluation account, my open peak balance increased by $2,000 to $52,000, which caused my trailing threshold to rise by $2,000 to $49,500. Instead of exiting the trade, I chose to stay in it. Subsequently, my account balance declined and dropped to $49,500, touching my current threshold, effectively erasing my drawdown and triggering an automatic account failure. Now, the old me who didn't fully understand the trailing threshold was like, but my threshold is at $47,500. My account should still be active. I only lost $500, so I should still have a $2,000 drawdown left. My account should still be active. It's not fair. Does this situation sound familiar to anybody else or just me? If I had a complete understanding of how the trailing threshold operated, I could have prevented that scenario. I hope that by sharing my experience, it can be beneficial to some of you. So that covers the fundamentals of the trailing threshold. But wait, when does the trailing threshold stop trailing the open peak balance? That's a great question. The guidelines for this vary between evaluation accounts and PA funded accounts. Let's start with the evaluation account guidelines for Rhythmic. For this illustration, I'll be using a 50K account. However, this scenario can be adapted to any of the full-size accounts available at Apex Trader Funding. The only variable that would differ is the numbers involved. In the Rhythmic evaluation account, the trailing threshold will stop once it hits the profit goal for the account size. The 50K account has a $3,000 profit goal, which means it would need to reach $53,000. It's important to note that the trailing threshold needs to reach the profit goal, not your open peak balance or account balance. When the threshold value hits $53,000, the trailing will cease at that point, regardless of whether the balance fluctuates higher or lower. The trailing thresholds rise from $47,500 to $53,000 encompasses the $2,500 max drawdown plus the $3,000 profit goal. In order for that to happen, The peak balance needs to increase by the account's profit goal amount, which is $3,000, and the max drawdown amount, $2,500, bringing the peak balance up to $55,500. Now, on the other hand, for trade-evade evaluation accounts, the threshold does not stop trailing. So no matter how high the balance gets, the threshold will continue to trail up. Now that we've established the criteria for when the evaluation accounts stop trailing, let's proceed to the PA funded accounts. The PA funded account guidelines for when the threshold stops trailing are the same for both rhythmic and trade-evade accounts. The threshold will stop trailing when the peak balance surpasses the max drawdown amount in profit related to the account size, plus an additional $100. Now, what does that mean? To illustrate this, let's use a 100K size account. The max drawdown for a 100K account is $3,000, which starts the trailing threshold at $97,000. Once your peak balance increases by the max drawdown amount of $3,000 plus $100, which would put it at $103,100, the threshold will also rise by $3,100, capping out at $100,100 and not trailing up any further. It's important to emphasize that the trailing threshold needs to reach $100,100 in order for the threshold to stop trailing, not your open peak balance or account balance. With a threshold fixed at $100,100 and no longer trailing the peak balance, monitoring the peak balance is no longer needed. Remember, during the period when the trailing threshold is active, it follows the live upward movement of the peak balance. However, now that the threshold has permanently settled at $100,100, keeping an eye on the peak balance is unnecessary. Now you can concentrate on boosting your overall account balance, which naturally widens the gap between your account balance and the threshold. This in turn enables a more substantial drawdown, optimizing your potential gains. Let's say your account balance were to rise to $110,100. The threshold will remain unchanged at $100,100, and your drawdown will increase to $10,000. Similarly, withdrawing funds from your PA funded account will not revert the threshold back to $97,000. It will remain fixed at $100,100. If you wish to observe this example applied to different account sizes, here's a handy reference guide featuring the relevant figures for each account category. This cheat sheet includes the complete account sizes, the max drawdowns corresponding to each size, the peak balances required for the threshold to stop trailing in a PA funded account, and the respective threshold amounts needed for the trailing to come to an end in a PA funded account. If you're ready to apply the concepts covered in this video, you can purchase evaluation accounts by clicking on my affiliate link in the description or use promo code WISDOM, where you will automatically receive the highest discounted promotion that Apex Trader Funding is currently providing. It's worth noting that Apex Trader Funding permits up to 20 active funded accounts per household. So until next time, happy trading and thank you for watching Trader Wisdom.